In 2018, when a good friend of mine moved to Colorado, I was a bit dismayed, but I also had a really strong feeling that great things were ahead for him. And sure enough, his metal band Old Deer's first full length LP, Someone in the House, is providing proof of my suspicions. But before we dive into the album, let's get a little background on the characters involved. After moving to Colorado, Matt Conley spent a brief amount of time as a solo musician, releasing Of Lakes and Endless Roads under the moniker Eelnock. That album also includes the first iteration of Still So Still, which is a cut from this current LP. But it wasn't until one of his ex bandmates, Josh King from his previous band Dummo, moved out to Colorado and they finally found their first lineup of musicians to form Old Deer. They proceedingly recorded their first EP, Something in the Water. After getting acquainted with the Colorado metal music scene and doing a bunch of shows, their original drummer actually ended up having to depart the band, which leads us to our current lineup, including Tyler Mills and Adam Schubert. Returning to Green Door Studios to record Someone in the House, Old Deer were seeking to improve upon the sound of their first creation, but also to capitalize on the ideas and the sounds that worked the first time around. Some ideas that have been culminating for years were able to finally materialize on this album, making the creation of it more purposeful and driven. The album examines the concepts of life purpose, loneliness, and theism, making it a contrasting companion to the subjects of external threat more present in the first EP. With a stronger focus on sonic elements and dynamics, this album delivers even more noise and ambience, while simultaneously allowing even more creative effluence. So, without further ado, let's dive into The album opens with a reprisal to the opening of their first EP with a ferocious mathematical instrumental barrage before slamming into the brief yet thrashy introduction of The Hatch. A blistering passage of speedy double kicks and punchy guitars gives way to the chromatic melodies that carry the dizzy feeling of an existential breakdown that's presented within the lyrics. Who am I to question it all? Is the phrase that sends us into an eerie buildup reminiscent of Mr. Bungle or Dillinger Escape Plan, peaking at the first iteration of this subtle hook refrain, coupled with a lovely female vocal feature from Sally Patrick. Then another instrumental break with some tasteful and deviously timed saxophone from sexy saxman Scott, giving way to an intense and pummeling breakdown with chunky guitars, very reminiscent of early Mastodon, with which the song ends. A real thrill ride of an opener. With Still So Still, we are met with a galloping rhythm in 6, with metronomically synced screams of anguish and contempt, underlining the intention of the opening verse and segueing into what seems like a fervent prayer for the inexplicable chaos and cruelty of existence to cease and become still, so still. The guttural screams on silence as such a release emphasize this point, and with a sustained bellow, we are thrown into a punchy 4/4 riff with blast beats that continually increase in intensity until a brief pause for breath before submerging the listener into the final brutal refrain, like being plunged down into the water and becoming still, so still. The next track, one of my favorites, Take It All. The feedback crunch at the opening gives way to scalding pinched harmonic chords and a classic metalcore riff that harkens back to the early days of bands like Every Time I Die and Botch, with lyrics that speak to the uncertainty and futility that comes with being a creative soul in a calloused modern world, offering to the listener to take a piece of that spirit, little by little, with each listen until it's all gone. Astrid is a gorgeous and haunting acoustic interlude that sounds like an epitaph for a loved one lost and gives us a small reprieve before the door to the house is opened and we climb into the title track, Someone in the House. A splendidly doomy riff opens up the track until breaking away with the theatrical rock and roll ritardando. Quickly, it resumes with a locomotive chugging verse, reminiscent of many black metal and metalcore roots, with lyrics that debate the veracity of theism in an uncaring world. The brutality gives way to a sweeping symphonic passage with some well placed strings provided by Sally Patrick, Angela Jensen, and Colin McGurty. And then it once more plunges into an extended instrumental passage reminiscent of an Opeth song. It all ends with the cacophonous reprisal of the phrase "know just why" over a raucous blast beat. Maelstrom, one of the promoted singles for the album, is one of the sludgiest and hardest hitting riffs on the album, and it opens up a track that decries the fear and animosity that seems to surround us on all sides in modern day life. This song features more cello from Angela Jensen and some epic and dramatic clean vocals from lead singer Matthew Conley that are reminiscent of Devin Townsend, with the phrase "I haven't slept at all for days" really bringing home the feelings of paranoia and the dread of the onlookers of mass casualties. The album slows down to a close with the sludgiest and doomiest track on the album, which happens to be a purely instrumental affair, save for some chilling recorded samples that help to create a disturbing and unsettling atmosphere. The bits of noise and droning guitars capture the feeling of impending doom and dread that a victim might feel, or someone trapped. This is all, of course, paired with a perfectly morbid and vivid music video that depicts a homicide on a quiet night in the woods and a calm and collected killer. Conley cited this track as being particularly difficult to create, not only because the band had only played it once before going to record it in the studio, but also because it was particularly emotionally difficult, as the voicemails that are featured in this track are voicemails of their recently deceased grandmothers. This closing track helps to give the album a grave finality, and it really lets those feelings of dread kind of sink in and makes you think about the current state of things. And it's just also an incredibly impactful listen. It's a vibrant album with a lot of ideas, and while it's not trying to reinvent the wheel, it is its own thing. A lot of passion and hard work and dedication went into this project, and I think that these guys have even greater things to come in the future. The band was in agreement that the biggest challenge that really faces most bands nowadays is simply time and money. Having to be a part of a group that essentially has to operate as a business while everyone in the band has their own lives, their own full time jobs. That's really the thing that makes everything more difficult than anything else. But those difficulties can be overcome when a community ends up surrounding a band and the fans actually get involved. And that's how those communities grow. So, in the interest of supporting artists and growing communities around these artists that I review, I hope that if you see this video, you will share it to somebody else you know loves local music, and that we can together build a fan base and build a community around these people. So that way they get their flowers now, not later. But anyway, enough of me yapping. If you've enjoyed this review and you want to go check out Old Deer, they are available on all streaming services. And they have a couple of great music videos out on YouTube. And they're currently going through the scene in Colorado and making a name for themselves. So get out there and catch their shows. Deuces.